Welcome to CISO Conversations, EU Data Regulations. I'm your host, Kev Johnson. If you, like so many IT leaders out there, are seeking ways to navigate the new EU data regulations, this is for you. In each episode, you'll hear from people like yourself, regulation contributors and writers, and leading experts on data security on how the upcoming rollout of multiple data regulations in the EU is putting everyone's minds to the test. Today, we're diving further into the topic of DORA versus NIS2, the big battle of the 2024 regulation giants. In the last episode, we discussed how they differ and where they overlap. We've invited EMEA Field CISO Richard Cassidy and Jack Poller, ESG Analyst, back into the studio to share insights on where IT leaders should focus their efforts and resources to turn compliance into a strategic advantage. We'll keep today's episode short, sweet, and to the point. If you want just one brain twister from today's episode, make sure you flip your ears forward when Richard answers the question on whether IT budgets should go primarily to regulatory compliance or ransomware protection. Enjoy.
I'm Jack Poller, Senior Analyst with Enterprise Strategy Group. Joining me today is Richard Cassidy from Rubrik. Richard, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Certainly. Thanks very much. So I am Field CISO with Rubrik. So my role is combining really a lot of what I've done in the past couple of decades and helping CISOs and C-suite better understand how to build cyber resilience and data security strategies.
Is this just a compliance issue, meaning that, from an organizational concern, I just have to sort of check the boxes, or does this really affect my organization in terms of things I have to do?
Yeah, so significant effects, because we'll talk about NIS2 and DORA separately, because it's I think is the best way to approach the answer. There'll be a technology stack that will help you align to the NIS2 directive and DORA regulation. Right. And the main challenge with DORA, at least from the conversations I'm having, is that there isn't all the technology coverage areas or the capabilities within the existing tool sets to give the coverage the DORA is going to want. So a lot of organizations are having to realign budgets, rethink cybersecurity resilience spend to be able to get to the DORA finish line, if you like. And so that's a big challenge, right? Because implementing new technology, it doesn't matter what size organization you are, that's a long project in of itself. And to do that with existing security stack and data stack is also a challenge. So that's why the timelines are as we said. NIS2, it's all about using the existing technology stack, which almost all organizations have in terms of threat detection, threat monitoring response, vulnerability assessments, those kind of things, using them more effectively, doing things smarter, working harder. And I think the good news for most organizations is they'll buy 100% of a product and more often than not use 20% of the functionality. And so what DORA and NIS2 are going to do is squeeze that extra 80% where possible out of the technology vendors. So expect your vendors to have to work harder to help you get there than it being the other way around, we hope, in the next 12 to 18 months.
Right. Now, is the penalty for non-compliance significant?
Indeed. So I think with NIS2, we're a little bit, it's an easier question to answer in terms of fines. So not too dissimilar from what we saw with GDPR, which is interesting. But let's talk about it nonetheless. So with regards to NIS2, you can find yourself being fined up to 10 million euro if you fail to reach compliance with the directive. Now, that's not too dissimilar to what we're seeing in terms of capped revenue or equals 2x with GDPR. Right. Straightforward. With DORA, this is where things become very interesting. So DORA has its own regulatory fine ecosystem or framework. And that is also 10 million, lo and behold, no surprises there. However, there are other implications within DORA. So let's talk about the financial ones just now. You can also and will also be liable for third-party costs. And there is no limitation in this regulation as to what the cap of those costs could be. So if you are a major organization with tens of thousands plus users, technically, depending on the type of event that occurred, you could have every user come after you for compensation as a result of what may have happened to you. And so it's really hard to ascertain what we think the damage or blast radius could be. It could be business, it could be existential, it could end businesses overnight. So that's really important. But the other thing about DORA that we have to talk about is forget about fines. DORA holds the board responsible now for failure to meet the regulation. And so there can be punitive measures placed on businesses, restrictions on how they trade, where they trade. Executives can now do custodial sentences as a result of not meeting DORA regulations. So, I mean, there's a lot of serious changes to this regulation and a far more reaching fallout than financial implications than we've seen in any regulation previously.
So this actually, you'd say DORA even has sharper and pointier teeth than GDPR, because you can be personally liable, and as you said, custodial sentences, go to jail, right, for this, and that's serious stuff that we have to, organizations really need to think about these things. So let's sort of talk about how is an organization going to prepare? What's sort of a high level recipe to prepare for these?
Great question. And again, there are similarities in the way that I would recommend you approach both. And it's no surprise that you have to first do a bit of a scope and a delta differential analysis of what the regulation needs you to do and what you have to do it and what the gaps are. I know that's very high level. Let me just bring it down to another step. I would believe, from my experience, the wrong way to approach it initially would be to say, okay, well, here are all the articles in DORA. Here are all of the steps that NIS2 directive wants me to follow. So let's go through it step by step and do a technology risk assessment and then align where we have gaps. That's a lot of work to do. NIS2 and DORA both have these domains that we talked about earlier, these 5 core domains. And so I'd be looking at it that way, but saying in each domain, what's our level of capability maturity? And then where do we not have capability as it relates to DORA and NIS2? And that gives you a much better heat map of where you need to place some very critical efforts early on to get there. Now, beyond that, it's really a straightforward process. And so what you need to be doing as organizations is you need to be engaging with key stakeholders, and that's your vendors. Hold your vendors to account, please, and your partnerships and those service providers that are there to help you transact and be secure, and work with them. It's a team sport here in getting the regulation steps ticked off and knowing that you can validate. Most importantly, you have to be able to validate to the auditors that you meet those requirements. So initially do a gap risk assessment, look at where the frameworks you can align to today, where you can't, then do a domain level alignment and heat map where you're weakest as an organization, and then start to bring in the vendors and the partners and the support network to help you go through each of the key points one by one and fill those technology or process gaps that you'll have.
It strikes me, based on what you said, that even though we have a little bit more time and runway for DORA, that that's may even be the more critical one for organizations, because they may have holes in their technology stack that they need to fill. And particularly in large organizations, that means going through a budgeting cycle or an emergency budget to go acquire a tool or acquire, additional tools or changes to the tools to do what they need, which is, just even the budgeting cycle takes time, right? So that's a big concern. So I wanted to talk about something related to this all, which is, I asked you earlier on about, sort of what areas they cover, and we mentioned sort of cybersecurity resilience. And I think we can't talk about cybersecurity and recovery and resilience without talking about sort of the elephant in the room, ransomware. I think ransomware is on everybody's mind, and we have a lot of research data at ESG about ransomware, and our data shows that about a third of organizations are attacked with ransomware on a weekly or daily basis. About a third of attacks overall in ransomware are successful. And unfortunately, those who've been attacked have been attacked successful attacks multiple times. And half of those organizations who are successfully attacked can't recover and therefore pay the ransom in order to recover. And they still don't get 100% of their data back. So I think it's sort of really important So I wanted to think about this sort of from, you as a CISO and your conversations with CISOs and others. Um, Sort of does just thinking about from complying with the regulations, does that protect a ransomware, or is there something, a little bit different? I mean, what's DORA and NIS2 going to do for organizations for ransomware?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me tackle it this way. So, do the regulations give you a capability to protect against ransomware above and beyond what you might already be doing? The answer is not directly. With all due respect to the regulations and the directives, and I can say this with 23 plus years in industry, what the regulations are focused on, NIS2 is more concerned with your ability to detect incidents, to use the tools correctly, to find security potential breach points much more quickly and effectively, and share that data, right? Really importantly, so that we learn by partnership and by tribal knowledge. DORA is heavily focused on operational resilience. So then you could say, well, which of those are more important? Well, they're both super important in protecting against ransomware, because if you have the notion that you'll be able to protect against every potential ransomware strain that will come and has already come, and every variation of that, especially given the proliferation of ransomware as a service, I wouldn't say that's a wise strategy to have in the back of your mind when you're looking at IT security and resilient spend. But where legislation is helping, especially DORA, is if the worst case does happen, if you do get targeted and successfully breached by a ransomware code, and it does what it does and encrypts your data, then at least with DORA, there's a heavy focus on resilience. So you will have the ability to recover to a point in time that is not where the ransomware hit and is before the business operations took a turn for the worst. And that's kind of really where businesses need to be when it comes to combating ransomware overall. If we assume that the worst case will happen, then the best case has to be that we can get the business operational. And this is also where the legislations are focusing key efforts. What's your minimum viable business? What are the critical assets, the critical data points, the critical accounts that you would need to operate as a minimum viable business? And where NIS2 organizations are doing well on the security side, they should draw down from DORA on this. And don't get me wrong, NIS2 has business continuity functions which do focus on some of the elements here, but DORA is much more hyper-focused. And so with ransomware, yes, regulations help you, but they don't get you there. But what the regulations are trying to get the organizations to mature are certainly going to put you in a much better position when it comes to a ransomware scenario. And you're going to be able to recover your business operations more quickly. And then you can go about the process of learning from the errors and closing down those avenues of breach that caused it in the first place.
Right. So, even though these regulations are highly technical and really think about sort of the IT technology stack, they're also strategic in nature, right? So thinking about from a very high level, how do we ensure business continuity?
Right.
Those strategic issues. So, as a CISO, when you think about it and working with, CISOs working with the board of directors and the company's executive leadership, sort of which is sort of wins and is more important, thinking about it from complying with the regulations point of view, or saying, thinking about it as my first order business is protecting against ransomware?
Oh, that's a tough question. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it, in some respects, in that it's a good question, right? Because this is exactly what's going through the minds of C-level at most organizations, if not, a large proportion of them, is what's first? Do I focus around ransomware, or do I get through the regulations? And the unfortunate answer is you have to do both, right? Because you can't not align to DORA. And by the way, UK organizations aren't out of the woods on DORA. Just because we're not an EU member state doesn't mean that DORA doesn't apply there. It does, because if you want to transact with a EU entity that needs to be needs to align to DORA, then you have to demonstrate how you do that. So just something to remember. Mm-hmm. And so if you fall foul of the regulations, right, DORA specifically could cause doors to close, right, because the fines will just be insurmountable. You can't possibly keep up with the amount of legal paper on your desk for recovering costs from customers or partners. And the same with NIS2, right? And NIS2 gives will give national security agencies a lot more control over coming in and making you do things in your organization that will help you be more secure. And that has a cost associated to it. So you have to do both. But where I would really want organizations to focus a lot more of their efforts is definitely on the ransomware side, because you're only going to be calling the regulators in and communicating with them when those breaches occur. So it would make sense to focus a lot more of your capabilities around doing the best you can to A, detect these things when they occur, and B, recover from them in the best possible way, reducing the blast radius as tightly as you can, so that you've got less conversation to have with the regulators and hopefully no fines to pay. And if you are going to pay a fine, because, it can happen, then you've limited that liability as well. So I hope that answers your question. It's kind of both, but I'd focus a little bit more heavily on ransomware if I were a CISO of an organization this year.
Yeah, well, I think, regulations versus cybersecurity, thinking about particular cybersecurity events is, a challenge that everybody has in terms of the strategy, right? It's I can only do how many things at once. So what's my priority look like? So with that in mind, sort of how does working with Rubrik help an organization in these efforts?
So Rubrik, we're on a mission to secure the world's data, and that's a very big statement. But here's why we're relevant to organizations in both the regulatory climate and also in the current data security climate. First is we're a platform that allows you to converge all of your critical data across all of your systems and applications, be it on-prem, be it cloud, and allow you a single platform, a single pane of glass for backing that data up in a secure and mutable fashion. So the data can't be tampered with. Once it's in the system, it's secure, and you can then recover in a secure way. Should the worst happen, let's think about ransomware, for example. You need to find the patient zero, and you need to make sure you're recovering from a non-ransomware infected image for a particular application, service, or entire ecosystem. And more importantly, it's the data inspection that we allow in your data at rest that allows organizations to have a significant level of maturity than we've seen ever before in industry, because most organizations are focusing on data in motion, endpoint security, server, you name it. A lot are not serving their data at rest, which is where a significant amount of very, very key information sits in terms of have you been breached, or are there sensitive data silos that you didn't know about that you need to protect better, and so on and so forth, and even threat hunting in that data. So our platform isn't just about backing up data across all of these diverse systems and about giving you a secure recovery capability. It's about adding that data security, that true data at rest capability, to stay one step ahead and make sure you find the events of interest before potentially the attacker does or the auditor does.
Well, that is, I think, a very interesting way to look at it in protecting the data and securing the data. And that's, sort of the start for, resilience and operational resilience, of course. And I think that that's sort of a great place to sort of wrap this up. Any final thoughts that you might want to have to the audience about sort of thinking about DORA and NIS2 overall? Yeah,
absolutely. Take a deep breath. You can achieve it. And there are a lot of tools out there to help you. And we've got many here at Rubrik as well for you to look at. But it is something that you can do. You'll find a lot of the technology you have in place today gets you a significant step forward in regulation against NIS2 and or DORA. And but start the process. If you haven't already, my advice is, make it your number one priority in tandem with ransomware for this year.
Thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, that wraps up today's episode of CISO Conversations, EU Data Regulations. For more insights on navigating data regulations, join us next time when we turn the spotlight on DORA and dissect why DORA makes operational resilience a priority for financial services organisations. Rubrik is on a mission to secure the world's data. We help organisations uphold data integrity, deliver data availability that withstands adverse conditions, continuously monitors data risks and threats, and recover their data when they are attacked. Make sure to hit the subscribe button to not miss out on future episodes.